Like, the hypothesis was, like, false on its face. And so
yeah,
it was, like,
it wasn't anything dramatic. They're like, is the sky blue? Let's find out.
If you are with someone who you're like, oh my gosh, we're so perfect together, but they also, like, partly don't want to be in a relationship with you, you're not working as well as you think you are.
We're Julie and Kelly, and we're here to find love. We're so excited to be back for a very special episode. We're going to be recapping the Ultimatum, and man, oh man, do we have thoughts. That's an understatement, because this show was problematic, it was chaotic, it was, as Kelly put it, maximalist, and just so much drama. So we're going to be talking about the general themes from the season itself, the couples, the fights, and what we think about ultimatums ultimately at the end, after just kind of like digging into everything. So join us and let's get started.
So The Ultimatum on Netflix is another kind of reality TV show, dating show type thing. It's similar to Love is Blind. It's kind of a sister show. It is also hosted by Nick and Vanessa Lachey. And the basic premise of the show is they have found a bunch of couples who have been together for a couple of years, and one of the partners has issued an ultimatum.
I love you to death, but I just cannot wait any longer. That is why I'm giving this ultimatum.
Meaning they have said, I need you, like, we need to get married or we need to break up. And so all of these couples have been invited to the show to participate in a little experiment. The experiment is basically the couples are going to break up and date other people from among the batch of couples. So they're going to kind of switch partners and then do a trial marriage, quote unquote. I don't really know what a trial marriage means, to be honest, but they are going to live with another partner who they've just met for 3 weeks to kind of see what that's like. And then they will go back to their original partner and live with their original partner for 3 weeks and see, you know, if they've learned anything about what they want to do with their ultimatum. And then at the end of the show, they have to make a decision if they're going to get married or if they're going to move on. Anyone listening to this knows, like, oh dear God, like, it is quite a messy premise for a reality TV show. It's very clearly designed to get the most kind of intense, chaotic emotions. It's designed to create jealousy. It's designed to create drama. I wouldn't even say that this show is particularly well-equipped to create happy, healthy, successful relationships. In comparison to, like, other dating reality TV shows, there is a believable premise behind, like, The Bachelor. Even Love is Blind, it's like, you can kind of see, like, okay, this would be interesting to see, like, if we can find real relationships through these very intense processes. But this show, it's kind of like, can a relationship emerge from this in a healthy, whole way? I don't know. And if you have seen the show, you probably walk away. I mean, I walked away from that show being like, wow, literally not a single one of these couples should be together. Like, all of these couples are pretty terrible like, the partners are really terrible to each other. And so it really came out through the process. So in that sense, it was successful, but it was definitely, I would say, ill-designed if the idea of the show was to create happy, healthy couples. Now, if the idea of the show is to produce drama, it was perfectly designed because we got a lot of it.
Yes. And I think that was something that a lot of the viewers said about the TV show, was that this is not, they're not even pretending that they're trying to make things better, that the relationship would be improved after this experiment. It felt very much like, you are rats in a lab experiment, and we're going to see what happens. We're going to document it. We are going to do things that are going to stoke the insecurities that already exist in the relationship. And that's it. Like, Vanessa and Nick being hosts already, they're kind of representing a very toxic kind of reality dating show, I believe. And they're not, I just don't think that there are people that are amazing for facilitating growth in this type of process. Because Vanessa is someone that issued an ultimatum, which is not a negative thing, but I think that it kind of speaks to what's her experience versus like this lived experience. And also the fact that they both seem a little bit to me like fame hungry, like they love being in the spotlight a little bit. So then it's like, what is the show really doing to meaningfully contribute to this like dialogue about relationships? Very little, but that's what me and Kelly are hoping to do with this video. Like, how can we just kind of like unpack some of this a little bit and glean some insight from it?
So first off, let's just put this out there. This show is based on what I would say is just like a myth related to monogamy and relationships. This idea that when you are in a happy relationship, you will never be attracted to another person. That is a lie, but that's what this show is kind of based around, this idea that like, well, if you're with the right partner, you won't even be interested in another person. And it's just like, that is just so false on its face, you know. Just because you are monogamous and in a happy relationship does not mean that you are suddenly not interested in other human beings. Suddenly no one else is gonna, you know, kind of pique your curiosity. No one else you're gonna find attractive. Like, no, obviously not. And so this is something that I think a lot of people want to believe. They want to believe that, oh, well, you know, if someone really loves me, they would just like really never have any eyes for anyone else other than me. But it's just, you know, the reality is people are human beings and people are interesting. There's an infinite number of interesting people in the universe. No, it's not like there's only one person on this planet that is going to be your soulmate and be the person who you could be in a good relationship with. It's fully possible for anyone, even people who are happy and in a happy relationship, to meet another person and be like, oh, I could also be in a happy relationship with that person. Doesn't mean that you're going to pursue it, but it just pretending that you will not meet another person that could fulfill that for you is living in a lie. You're living in a lie because you want to pretend that the person that you're currently with, your love is so special that you would never love anyone else. And it's just, when you live in that kind of fantasy, that's what produces the kind of deep insecurities and fears that you see emerge on this show, right? You see all of these contestants getting freaked out about the idea that their partner is connecting with another person.
You're too comfortable with the idea of being with somebody else. That's all I'm saying. It should be hard for you not to see me.
The hardest thing for me to stay here and listen to my best friend tell me that he's falling for somebody else.
Clearly, y'all had a great fucking experience.
It doesn't matter.
It does.
Even the premise of the show is kind of, it suggests that like, well, if the person that you came with is the person you're supposed to be with, you won't really like the other person that you date. But it's like, that is so untrue that it's kind of like the experiment doesn't even really make sense, because there's no reason why, like, just because I connect with another person, I feel like you could make me live with an attractive person who I'm generally compatible with for 3 weeks. Of course I'm going to start to feel feelings for them. Like, that's not shocking. Nothing about that is like, that doesn't mean that my current relationship is less of a good fit for me just because I started to have feelings for another person. It actually doesn't mean anything if I start to have feelings for another person. And I think the show is trying to make it seem like it should be a big deal, and that if you develop feelings for another person, then you weren't really interested in your original partner. But that's just like, it's so not true on its face. And all it's doing is introducing this additional layer of pain and confusion it's just not necessary. And it doesn't actually teach any of the couples anything about their original relationship, because it is so possible to develop feelings for another person. If you give another person the time, energy, attention, which is exactly what they did in this experiment, yeah, you can develop feelings for them. So it just doesn't make sense to use that as a litmus test for whether or not your original partner is a good fit for you. It's not telling you anything. So I think the premise on its face doesn't make sense.
Also, like, the premise of the show feels like a gotcha. It's like, ooh, you're interested in someone else. This means that there's something deeper about your relationship that's inherently problematic. This means that it's not your person, because if you really do love your person, and once again, it's attaching that type of belief system to the idea of a fairy tale, that once you find your person, you're just so for them that there's absolutely no one else that can enter your consciousness, no one else that you can be attracted to. And if that isn't the case for you, that means that the relationship is not for you. that to me is really problematic because I just don't think that's true. And I think the show making it seem like it's a big deal that people can be attracted to people even in long-term monogamous relationships, they wanted it to be a lot more saucy than it actually was, because to me it was very inevitable, because of course if you meet someone new and you vibe with them, there's going to be feelings. It's biology, it's just the nature of what it's like to be around someone attractive. It's the curiosity of the experiment too, of like, who is this person, were they chosen on this experiment to be with me? Like, all of these factors are kind of hyping it up. So to me, I just don't think that the ultimatum really had this like hypothesis that was so groundbreaking. It just felt like, okay, and of course they're all gonna, you know.
That's such a good way of saying it. Like, the hypothesis was like false on its face. And so it was like,
it wasn't anything dramatic. They're like, is the sky blue? Let's find out.
I know. That's kind of what it was. It really just didn't make any sense. Like, it was like, to me it was like, let's just add this unnecessary complication to, 6 couples who already have a lot of drama in their lives. Let's just add this other little bomb in there. It's like, what is the point of this? This is not gonna help these couples get more clarity on their own relationships. All it's gonna do is introduce this other variable of like, do I want to be with my original partner or do I want to be with this new partner? And you could introduce that variable to any happy, healthy relationship. Like, you could introduce that variable to a couple that's been together for 50 years, and it would still have to be a consideration, right? And so, you're just introducing an unnecessary variable to these people's lives, and it's not teaching them anything about their current relationship. It's really doing is it's playing into this idea that if you love someone enough, you'll never be interested in anyone else. And it's like, we just need to get away from that myth, because that myth, all it does is create so much more pain when these inevitable feelings do happen. Versus if you recognize hey, it's just so possible for me to develop feelings for another person. It's so possible for my partner to develop feelings for another person in the right context. And nonetheless, I am still committed to my partner because, that's just the person that I know I want to be with. Even though I know that I could be with other people and that I would be compatible with other people, it's okay. I don't need to freak out about the fact that that is a possibility. I can still be with my partner, even though I know there are other people in the world that I could also be with. And so, maybe the experiment kind of lends itself to that conclusion, but it was kind of it's like all of these contestants were so kind of sunk into this monogamy myth that all of them were, you see this specifically with Shanique and Randall, right? You see Shanique freaks out about the idea that Randall could also have feelings for Madeline. And throughout the entirety of the show, she's just constantly thinking about if Randall actually has feelings for Madeline, what does that mean for us? And you can see that she's spinning her wheels on it. And she basically wants Randall to be like, no, I didn't like Madeline that much.
What have you seen from Madeline that she can work on?
At this point, it's none of my concern, truthfully.
Yeah, that's great. But can you say it? I'm still struggling.
What are you trying?
I'm saying can you just say what Madeline can work on?
And Randall is the whole time no, I liked her a lot. I can't tell you that I didn't like her.
I think you want me to say something that I hated about Madeline. I think that's what you want me to say. Maybe that's why it's hard for me to explain what she needs to work on, because we had a good experience.
Right, say less.
And Shanique keeps getting set off by that. But if Shanique had kind of the acceptance and that feeling of it's okay if Randall had feelings for another woman, all that matters is Randall wanting to commit to me nonetheless. If she was able to accept and kind of reject that monogamy myth, then she could move on to the real question, which is what does Randall want to do in our relationship? But she was so caught up on the Madeline thing the whole time that it kind of bogged down their journey. They weren't even really able to work on any of their own stuff because she was so focused on this other person. So in that sense, that's why it's kind of the experiment. It was not the right type of structure for where a lot of these people were kind of on their emotional growth journey, if that makes sense.
Right. It totally makes sense, because I think that was something that the show tried to, I think, grab at. How can we make love feel like an active choice of commitment, which it basically is? How can we make them choose each other? Or not even make them, have them choose each other even after being presented of all of these other alternatives, all of these other attractive options, but still be like, I want this person at the end. Unfortunately, the way that they framed that question was lost in the drama they were hoping to receive from like the couples living together for 3 weeks. I think the experiment of the show could have been structured to be a lot different, could have been a lot more interesting, but they made it all about like, oh, can you have this like sliding doors life of someone else? And would that be better than your 2-3 year relationship with your partner? I think that's where a lot of the tension and the originality of the question got lost, because that could have been explored in such an interesting, fascinating way. And they just chose the lowest hanging fruit. How can we just go for drama?
That is so well said. It's kind of like, you know, the way that Lachey's like portray or describe the dilemma to the contestants was very like, well, you know, the reason that some people hesitate to get married is because they're always wondering, what if there's someone else out there that's better for me?
Let's be honest, fear of commitment almost always boils down to the exact same question. Is there someone else out there who might be a better fit?
I'm like, is that the reason why people hesitate to
I know
get married?
that's their reason, because
Like,
they kind of spoke about that. They were
right.
Vanessa and Nick were like, we dated other people, but I'm like, that's your journey. That's not these
Exactly.
couples. They don't need to have that, maybe.
Right. None of these couples were like concerned about like there's someone out there who could be a better fit. All of these couples were like, we have our own issues that we need to work through. They weren't there because, or they weren't hesitating on getting married because they were thinking about the better people who else they could date that might be a better fit. No one described the fact that they were thinking about that. So I don't know why they like kind of had to introduce that, you know, that factor, because that, you know, that's a factor for any couple in any relationship, not just couples where an ultimatum has been issued. It's like any couple is trying, it, you know, does a little bit of like a, you know, is this the right relationship for me? Should I, you know, is our set of issues and the set of issues that I want to deal with for the rest of my life? Or is there like another person who might be a better fit for me, right? Every couple does that. That's not unique to these ultimatum couples. And so I don't know why this particular kind of twist or this particular like experiment was applied to couples with ultimatums, because they got other things to deal with. They got other like issues they're trying to work through. So to me, it just seemed like a kind of a silly premise for a show, or a silly structure for an experiment, given the fact that these couples had real things to work on, you know?
That's very well put. It's very low denomination solution. It's like, okay, let's just go. It's obvious because it's about sex. It's obvious it's about attraction to other people, but what's the point of talking to a stranger about your relationship, or, right, you know, like being attracted to them and sleeping in the same bed? How is that really tackling anything? Or having your parents and your family members meet someone else that you chose for this 3-week thing? To me, it just kind of felt like there's no investment in it. And I think we got to see that with the couples, with what they did or they didn't get out of the show at the very end. I don't think it moved the needle for a lot of them the way that the show was maybe hoping it would. I know some got married, but I don't consider that like a success. I consider that kind of like a foregone conclusion based on where some of those people were already headed.
Well, if you think about it, none of the new couples got together, right? None of the new couples, like the exchanged partners, none of them got together. All of them went back to their original partners and were like, okay, well, that was a weird 3 weeks. Now let's continue working on our problems. So it was kind of like that whole part of the experiment really just kind of upped the drama factor. But all of them came back and they were like, well, okay, back to talking about our problems about not listening to each other. Well, okay, back to talking about our problems with jealousy. Like, it was like, you know, it was like a 3-week break from talking about their problems, and then they had to come back and be like, all right, getting back to it. So it was like almost like an aside to like the real issues that needed to be dealt with. So you're right. It's like, even though some couples emerged at the end getting married, well, one couple got married. it didn't seem to be the result of, oh, she went off and dated another guy and then she came back and realized she wanted to be with me. Like, that's not even what happened. So it was like, the experiment was so irrelevant to like any of these couples' journeys. Being on a TV show was relevant, of course, when you're on a TV show and kind of being forced to talk about your relationship and given a concrete deadline for when you're gonna make a decision. That does give you structure to not just kind of dragging out a decision and kind of forced everyone to make a decision at a specific time. And so
100%. That
seemed to be helpful, but it wasn't about the experiment and the exchanging of partners that helped the one couple that stayed together. So let us know what you all thought about just like the premise and the structure of the show, the structure of the experiment. Do you think that this show taught anyone anything? Do you think that this is an experiment that was helpful for the couples to go through? Leave your thoughts down below. We're very curious to hear what other people think.
So one of the biggest things that I noticed was, I mean, obviously April. I think she's a very big figure in this season, and I think she represents a type of person that is pretty common who wants to get married. Like, they want to get married so badly that they start evaluating people on a checklist and on a timeline. We've been together for 1 year. You have done XYZ to me.
You bought me a car. I just don't understand, if we're not married, why would you buy me a car?
The natural next step is to now get married. And if you're not marrying me, you're determining something about my worth as a wife, about my very being, and why you're choosing not to be with me. And I think that some of the other girls said that too. Ray kind of said something that was problematic, where she was like, I can clean, I can fuck, I can cook. What makes me not wifeable?
I stay in the gym, I have a degree, I cook, I clean, and I know how to fuck.
And those qualities, just, it doesn't really have anything to do with being a good partner to your person. Like, it's amazing to be good in charge of your sexual being and to have like these domestic responsibilities under your belt, but that's such a small piece into what it means to be a wife, what it means to be married. And I thought with April in particular, and some of the other girls on the show, them wanting a marriage so badly, I don't really know if they wanted it with their partner or if they just wanted it because they're at that exact time of their life where they're thinking about it, where they've been dating long enough that it's like, why doesn't my partner want this with me? And then that becomes the question, as opposed to like, are they even a good fit for me? They're just thinking, why are they not choosing me?
Totally. It felt like a lot of the girls, definitely April in particular, but several of them were kind of like talking about, they were like, this is my vision for my life. Like, I want to have kids. I want to have this certain like married lifestyle.
I pictured car seats in the second and third row, did I not? I'm driving this big ass SUV with nobody in the back seat.
Almost like a lifestyle thing. They were like craving a certain lifestyle, and they were like, well, I just need someone who will click into my picture. It was less about like, you and me, we're coming together, we're gonna co-create a future together that's exciting, that both of us want. It was like, no, here's the future that I have already determined is gonna be my future, and I just need to find the right person to pluck into it.
I'm ready for my first baby, and then I'm gonna have to have another baby a couple years after that.
I have everything planned out in my life, my next steps, my next career move. Just, isn't that kind of how it goes, you know? College, then proposal, then babies, then...
They were just kind of like describing these visions for their lives, and it was like, is any of this stuff that Jake wants? Is any of this stuff that Zay wants? Or are you just kind of talking about your own vision and just like telling them, like, you need to fit into my vision. Like, you need to like contort yourself into the little hole I've made for you. Like, that's the thing about relationships. Relationships are not about finding, you know, a person who is going to have no needs of their own and fit into your life and you're not going to make any adjustments or anything. It's about together, coming together, co-creating a vision for your shared life. And it should be something that both of you are contributing to. And if it's really just one person's vision and the other person is kind of like getting stuck in, like kind of taped on to the side, it's like, that's not a real relationship. And it's like, at that point, I can understand for Jake, right? That doesn't feel good to feel like it could be anyone in April's picture. It doesn't even have to be me. It just so happens to be me because we've been dating for 2 years. You can really feel that April was not trying to collaborate with him into creating a mutually exciting life. she was basically like just telling him like he needs to come and sit down in the chair that she set up for him and like be quiet and just be the perfect husband figure that she has imagined for herself. And that feels pretty bad. It feels pretty bad to not feel like you have a say in your relationship and you have a say in what your future is going to be like. And so I'm not surprised that Jake and a lot of these other people who were given the ultimatum were feeling apprehensive, given the way, in particular, it was the way that a lot of these women were talking about marriage. It just felt very centered on their own desires and not really, it didn't feel like a real relationship for a lot of these people. It just felt like a wish fulfillment, if that makes sense, or like a fantasy fulfillment.
Right. That's a good point, because I remember a lot of the guys, especially the ones in relationships where the girl really wanted to get married, they would bring up these very valid points into why they weren't really considering it or why they were taking their time with it. But I felt like a lot of that was kind of like waved aside, because it's like, well, this is what I want and we've been dating for this long that becomes everything. Like, I do think that a lot of the girls too, they were just attaching their worth into getting the ring so much. Like, if my partner really loved me, then he would absolutely marry me because he sees this is what I want. I want to have a family with him. I want to have kids with him. But as they were talking about it, I couldn't help but feel like they keep talking about it like it's a fantasy almost. Like having children, getting married, all of these things. Like, if you're really... maybe because you work in the relationship space, like, to me, marriage and children are a huge, huge, huge deal. It's huge just in scope and responsibility and, like, all the things that, how it's going to change your life. I just think that they were underestimating that, and they were kind of playing up to the happy family, happy wife, happy life kind of thing. So it was hard for me to get invested in any of the couples because I saw that was what they wanted, and it wasn't like they were saying, like, of April talking about Jake, I see why Jake wants this, I'm okay taking my time. She never really said that. She just kept saying, I've done so much for him that he should see my worth and want to lock me down. That was her argument.
Right.
Yeah.
I think this really speaks to everyone's age. I mean, everyone on this show was so young. Like, some of these girls were like 23, 24. They were really young to be thinking about marriage. I know some people do get married around that age, but you can really see, it's not even just that they were like, sometimes young people are very mature, but you can really tell that a lot of these people, you know, there's a maturity level thing, kind of maturity like deficiency here. Like,
so right.
A lot of these people were like, oh, marriage, ew. Like, it was like, you know, to your point, Julie, like, marriage is, you know, it's a responsibility. Starting a family is a responsibility. It's not just like this fun thing that you do just because you want the lifestyle. Marriage is about a relationship that works so well that you want to do it forever. None of these relationships were working well. Every single one of them had so many deep problems, right? And if you are with someone who you're like, oh my gosh, we're so perfect together, but they also like partly don't want to be in a relationship with you, you're not working as well as you think you are, right? Like, you don't want to have a marriage with someone who like is like 35% like out the door, or 35% like kind of not wanting the same things that you're wanting. And so, you know, the fact that all of these people were wanting relationships or wanting marriages with people who just like didn't really want that, it kind of speaks to this idea that there was a lack of an understanding of what a marriage really is. Like, marriage is a two-way street. Both people have to be excited about it. Both people have to be excited about the idea of wanting to be together forever, work on it, commit to it, you know, building a life together. And you don't want to be building your life with someone who is apprehensive. You don't want to be building your life with someone who is, you know, wondering if they made a mistake. You know, you want to be with someone who is as excited as you are. Like, April deserves to be with someone who is as like, oh my God, marriage, oh my God, babies, oh my God, kids, as she is, right? She shouldn't have to like be dragging Jake down the aisle. And so the fact that all of these people were like trying to drag people down the aisle, essentially, who didn't want to be there, to me that speaks to the fact that like they don't really yet understand what relationships are about, right? They don't really fully understand what true commitment looks like. They were just
Agreed.
It's just there's much more interest in the idea of marriage and the kind of lifestyle, and they're like, oh, ring, oh, wedding, oh, like babies, more so than actually choosing marriage as a result of this relationship really works, and this relationship is really happy, and this relationship is really successful, and so we should just keep doing it. Marriage is not like just like a checkbox or like, you know, a thing, a milestone that you just like check off so you feel successful in your life. Marriage is something that is really only worth pursuing if your relationship is going really well, which is not true for any of these couples. So there was really no reason that any of these couples should have been considering marriage. And that's just the truth.
Hell yeah, dude. And as you're saying that, it just makes me think that's why I wasn't invested in the show or the couples from the jump, because I think that superficiality can come across. Like, first, that they're not really dealing with real issues in the relationship. They're dealing with these like superficial aspects to like what it means to be in a committed relationship, what it means if you like someone else, and then they're in this experiment, but it didn't feel like it had any stakes to it. It didn't feel like it had any type of learning opportunity that we could really watch. And I mean, with a lot of dating shows, it does feel like that, but at least they try to like make it seem like there's some type of weightiness to it. This show had absolutely nothing. It's fluff. And then if you push a little harder, it's more fluff. It's nothing substantial. It kind of just feels like this is a reality dating show that very much knows that they're a reality dating show, and that's it.
One other thing that I think is really important to talk about related to the premise of this show really sets up the idea of breaking up as like a worst case scenario. Like the show acts like, and the experiment kind of acts like, and all of these contestants kind of act, I guess they're not contestants, whatever. All of these people, all of these...
They kind of are. Yeah.
Whatever they are. Everyone who's on the show, they all kind of act like, oh my gosh, like breaking up like isn't even an option. Like if we broke up, that would be like the worst thing that could happen. But like, it is okay to break up. Like breaking up is not a bad thing. And I feel like sometimes the worst case scenario is just staying together. Like sometimes the worst thing that could happen is staying in a relationship that doesn't quite satisfy you with someone that you're not happy with. And so I think all of these couples, you can really feel that happening. Like with Randall and Shanique at the very beginning of the show, you know, they're getting ready to go into the experiment and exchange partners and start dating other people. And you can kind of see that Randall is excited about it. You can kind of sense that he's like, cool, we're going to date other people.
That's why we have to go in there open-minded.
And Shanique is freaking out. Shanique really doesn't want, to see Randall go off and be a single man. Like she's really freaking out. And it's like the way that they talk about each other throughout the show, you can kind of just tell that Randall is kind of not really thinking about Shanique very much while he's with his other partner. He doesn't really have anything very nice to say about Shanique.
She's always like talking, like always has an opinion. You know, Shanique is a very emotional person.
You can kind of see this with Colby and Madeline too. It's kind of like Colby is like, oh my gosh, Madeline's the best thing that ever happened to my life. And Madeline throughout the entire show is just like, Colby fucking sucks.
He annoys me. Like,
Gotcha.
I get annoyed. You don't have to say something every 5 seconds. Shut up and let me think.
Like she's just like the whole time she's like, oh my gosh, he's so immature. He can't admit when he's wrong. Like, she's just so like, she like hates the guy. And so it's kind of like, listen, if you don't like your partner, you don't have to stay with them. Even if you've been together for 2 years. Oh, God forbid. But like, it doesn't matter how long you've been together. It's like if it's not working for you anymore, you can leave. And that is not like this terrible thing that happens to you both. Even for the people who gave the ultimatum, for April, Shanique, like it's kind of like they gave these ultimatums and they're like, oh my gosh, like if we break up, like that will be the worst thing that happens. But it's like, is it? Like if the person that you really want to be with doesn't want to be with you, then you shouldn't be with them, right? And so I think that this show kind of pretends, and all of these contestants were kind of pretending that if they broke up, like it's like
the
they
worst
failed.
Case ever.
Right. It's like they failed, or like this was all a mistake. They shouldn't have come on here. But it's like, listen, if someone decides that they don't want to be with you, that's a good thing for you. Like, that's good for you to know, right? If someone decides, or if you realize that you are not that happy in your relationship and you choose to leave, that's a good thing, right? Those are good things for you to get out of relationships that aren't working. It's good for both people. It's good for your partner to get out of a relationship with someone who doesn't really want to be with them, and it's good for you so you can move on and go be in a relationship with someone you're actually excited about. And so I just don't like that this show, it's like marriage or move on, where marriage is like the goal and moving on is like you failed. And it's like, you didn't fail by moving on. You succeeded in taking care of yourself, and you succeeded in realizing what you actually want and need. And so you didn't fail the experiment by breaking up. You succeeded by getting out of a bad relationship, a relationship that wasn't working.
The show really could have benefited from that type of complexity with the way that they were presenting the outcomes you could have with this, because it really did feel like if you didn't get married with the person, then the relationship was kind of considered a mistake, someone that didn't appreciate you, someone, I think April and Jake definitely were framed that way. Because April was like, well, as soon as I broke up with him, I started seeing someone that immediately saw my worth, immediately started telling me all of these things. And I'm thinking, April, you wouldn't have had that experience if you didn't have Jake, for you to understand what you really wanted in a partner. But she kind of dismissed all of the things that Jake brought her to that point, and just kind of made it seem like it was a problem with him fundamentally, when it was really just growth for the both of them. Growth for April to realize the kind of man that she wanted to be with, and for Jake to realize, I actually want to be single, I want to be alone, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that the show was kind of, when they had the reunion and he was speaking about how he was still single, it's not like everyone was like, like you're like working on your problems, but I think that they were like, oh, Jake has all of these things to work on. Whereas I think being single is a very powerful move to make when you're really wanting to get to know yourself. But it kind of seemed to like, oh, Jake's a little bit sad, and look at April, she is thriving in her new life. And I don't see one as better than the other. They're both just doing exactly what they need to be how they want to be happy.
That's such a good point. In the reunion, they were kind of, everyone who was single, they were like, oh, poor Zay. Oh, poor Jake.
Like, oh, just kind of like pathetic almost. Like,
right.
dang.
It was like, they were like, it's like,
you're not doing
you're
good.
Single now? What a loser. It's like, what is this show? Are we, like, it's just so regressive, just like in the way you're thinking about it, or the way that people's kind of choices are portrayed. They're portrayed as like, if you didn't end up in a happy relationship, then you failed.
Something is wrong.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
it's just,
that's not true at all.
Obviously, it's not true at all.
So with that said, what do me and Kelly think about ultimatums in general? Okay, so I guess my personal opinion is ultimatum itself, that word is just vicious. It's kind of like having the talk. There's so much that goes into that unless you unpack your partner's specific definition of it, it can feel like a wall. And it's very hard to understand, like, what does it mean if someone's putting down an ultimatum? Because I think that a gentler way of seeing it is, this is my boundary and this is my timeline for that boundary. And I need X, Y, Z from you within this time. Otherwise, the relationship is not meant for me. I think there's value in that because there are certain constraints. Maybe someone doesn't live in the same town as you. Maybe you do want to get married and have children. And you're at a particular time frame, so it's really important to you that you're making sure that you're investing in the relationships that can give you the goals that you're eventually looking for. That kind of stuff, I feel like it could be a valid thing for the most part. I think the way that most people, or the way that the show views ultimatums, does not work. But I think if it's a boundary, it makes sense.
Yeah, I think that is how I feel about it too. It's like, the word ultimatum makes
it's such a big word, dude.
Yeah, it makes it feel like it's about pressure and makes it feel like it's about, this is what I want and you have to do the thing that I want, and if you don't do the thing that I want, then here's the punishment, here's the here's the consequence for you not heeding to my demands. And that's not a healthy way for a relationship to work. They're not about one person lays down the law and the other one has to obey. Like, that's not how a healthy relationship works. And so this is like an issue of power dynamics, right? It creates this weird power, struggle in the relationship, or one person, the person who's giving the ultimatum, is assuming this position of power where they get to say, like, this is what's going to happen, and if it doesn't happen, then you're done. And the other person is in this position where they don't get to really make demands anymore. They just like have to just listen to what the other person says. Even if that partner ends up going through with the relationship, even if that partner ends up going and, you know, getting married to that person, what ends up happening is it has kind of created this dynamic between the two people where, you know, one person has made it clear that, like, if you don't do exactly what I want, I'm out. The other person has also kind of made it clear that I'm kind of only doing this because you told me to do it, right? And so it creates this really weird, it's like, it is a good thing to be clear about what you want in a relationship. So to your point, like, you should be clear about what you want for your future. You should be clear about what you expect and, you know, what you want from your life and from your relationships. Like, you should be really, really clear about it. And I think that rather than structuring it as, you know, you gotta propose to me or I'm leaving you, I think it's more about being clear and making sure that your partner really understands that you're serious, and that your partner really understands we can't drag this on forever. You know that I want to get married, and so we need to be able to make a decision about this. It's not an ultimatum. It's more about, like, we need to have this conversation. We can't just keep kicking the can down the road. We need to be able to have the conversation and have it sooner rather than later, because if you are ultimately not going to want to get married, that's okay. That's what I want. So I need to be in a relationship where I know that that's where this is going. It's not an ultimatum, it's a conversation. And so I think that that's the problem. I mean, you could really see in this show that no one was having those kinds of conversations. Everyone was like, you put a ring on this finger or I'm out. And it's like, like, not allowing your partner to actually express what they want, their actual needs. You're not actually, again, it's like this thing of, like, if you're not building together, then it's not a relationship. If it's just one person who's dictating what's going to happen in the relationship, the other person is just being told they have to follow along, this is not a relationship. This is one person's fantasy, and you're kind of just along for the ride. And, like,
yeah,
I think that's really what the problem is. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, like, hey, I really want to get married, and if we're not going to be going down that path, I need to get out of this relationship. I think it's okay to say that, but I think I still think that's different from a quote-unquote ultimatum, where it's like, marry me or I'm out, you know? Like, I think that's the problem.
Like, that's the distinction between ultimatums. It's the way that you come into the conversation. It's the grace you give your partner. It's how much expansion you need. Because there is, I mean, relationships, like, you're in it for a reason. There's some goal you have in the relationship. And if your partner isn't able to meet that with you, but you really love them, it's like what you said, it's not an ultimatum, it's a conversation, which is so nicely put. It's a conversation with real actionables attached to it. It's a conversation where, like, depending on where it goes, it will determine the relationship. And it's like what Kelly said before, ending a relationship is not a bad thing. Ending a relationship is putting you back on the path that you really need to be on. Because if you're with your partner, that means that you wanted to be with your partner, and that's a future that you're invested in. And if they're not able to co-create that with you, if that's not a mutual consensual decision of, I want this so badly with you that I will build this actively without feeling like I'm forced to, without feeling like I'm doing it because of expectations or pressure, it is what it is. So
it comes back to this idea that we shouldn't make it seem like there's one good outcome and one bad outcome, and getting married is the good outcome and breaking up is the bad outcome, because there are situations where it doesn't make sense, right? There are situations where, you know, if you're forcing your partner to do something that they don't want to do, which is get married, like, that's not a healthy relationship. If you think that marriage with someone who doesn't really want it is still worth it and is still like, oh, well, at least I'm married, it's like, ooh, like, you are not pursuing
what are you doing?
Yeah, it's
what
like,
are you doing?
Like, focus on having a healthy, mutual relationship where both of you are excited. It doesn't matter when the ring gets on the finger. The point is, like, do we both really want this? And if you're not focusing on being in a relationship that is mutual, consensual, and, like, just, like, mutually satisfying and exciting, then you don't have a relationship that is really that worth being in, right? you want to be, I mean, everyone deserves to be in a relationship with someone who really wants to be in a relationship with them. And like, if they don't want to be in a relationship with you, then you shouldn't be there. And ditto with, I think sometimes the other side of this, which you hear a lot, you hear about like couples who've been together for like, you know, a decade, and like one person is just waiting for the other one to propose. You hear about this all the time. And then like, if at the end of 10 years, one person decides like, actually, I don't want this, and then they break up with that person, and then the person feels like, oh my God, I can't believe I wasted 10 years of my life with this person waiting for a proposal. It's like, that's not a good thing either. I think that that's kind of the one thing about the show I would say that was positive, was that it forced all of these people to take really intentional and focused time to work through their issues and to make a decision.
I'm glad you said a pro. I'm glad you said a pro. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, you know, it forced them to not avoid the issue or drag it out or kick the can down the road. I think that it's good to be proactive. Totally. And like, I think there's a lot, people feel a lot of discomfort with, obviously people feel discomfort with breaking up. It's so, like, breaking up is hard, and so people try to avoid the conversations that could lead to a breakup, and people try to avoid, you know, facing head on the issues that they know could result in them, you know, going their separate ways. People try to avoid that. But staying in a relationship because you feel guilty about leaving, staying in a relationship where you know your partner wants something else that you don't want, which is marriage, that's not okay either. And just dragging them along because you don't want to lose them, or because you don't want to have the uncomfortable conversation of breaking up with them, like, that's not okay either. I feel like that kind of felt like a thing that was happening with Randall and Shanique. It was like, Randall clearly didn't want to be with her, but like, he kind of felt like he owed it to her, or like it was the right thing for him to do, to like stay in the relationship. And it's like,
you're doing no one any favors with that type
no
of
one
thinking.
Exactly. You're not doing yourself a favor, you're not doing her a favor. Like, if you don't want to be in the relationship, leave. If you want something for the relationship that you're not getting, say it, have a conversation, make a decision together. Yeah, that's how I feel about ultimatums.
Yeah, the show, it had a missed opportunity. This could have been a really interesting show. They could have made it so nuanced. The conversations could have been so deep. It could have been really impactful. And we ended up just getting a bunch of people that still don't really know what they want. A lot of really drunken fights, which we'll discuss in part 2 of the video. And that was kind of just the show. It was a dumpster fire for sure.
Bit of a dumpster fire. That's how I feel about this show. I just feel like it was, like you said, a missed opportunity for like really thoughtful and nuanced conversations about this dilemma, which is a real one that a lot of couples go through. But like, it was just kind of like lost in the drama of these like really toxic fights and these really, the jealousy. Oh my gosh, are they gonna have sex? It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Like,
it's like, what is, I'm like, is the drama not the couples being together or not? Like, it doesn't really matter about the Ray, April of it all, even though that was interesting to watch. It just kind of felt like, to me, this is grass is greener happening in real time. The biggest question, the most interesting question, is what happens when they return back to their partners. Will they be changed? Or will they just kind of be like, which is what they ended up doing. I met someone that appreciated me, and you not seeing that means there's something wrong about this relationship, as opposed to seeing it as an opportunity to work on it and kind of like bring up, well, why was that relationship feeling the way that it did? Like, they just completely just kept missing these opportunities that Love is Blind, I think, really nicely plays into, which is like, is love blind? Can you tell with this experiment? Like, it's so thoughtfully done. This was a very poorly executed dating show, I would say. So you've heard me and Kelly's opinions on ultimatums. What do you all think? Do you think they work? What context do you think they work in? Have you done one before? How did it play out? Tell us in the comments down below, and let's talk about it.
Okay, so we have a lot of thoughts about the specific couples and the kind of specific things that each couple were fighting about. I mean, between like the jealousy and the insecurity to just like bad communication styles, bad conflict styles, snooping around on other people, on your partner's phone. There were so many different really like toxic relationship behaviors on display on this show. And we're gonna have a part 2 of this video that will go up soon so that you can see us really dissect each of these different kind of like major fights that happened throughout the show and talk about, you know, what were the things that went wrong for these couples? What were the behaviors that we should not emulate, as well as maybe what people in these situations could do instead of what they did. So if you want to see that video, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and you are hitting that little bell that gives you notifications so you see when that video goes up. And we will see you all next time. Bye.
Bye.